Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the virtual edition of We Robot 2020, the premier international conference on law and policy relating to robotics, hosted this year by the University of Ottawa Centre for Law, Technology and Society. Reinvented in the times of COVID-19, We Robot 2020 is presented with the generous support of Microsoft, CIFAR, X, and Intel, as well as the University of Ottawa, the University of Washington Technology Policy Lab, and Miami Law. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the We Robot format, please note that the authors do not present their own work. Instead, session discussants read the author's papers in advance of the conference and then present that work to the audience while offering constructive thoughts for improvement and seeding a conversation that follows. Authors have 5 minutes to discuss the discussant's feedback, and then the session opens up to the floor. For the virtual edition, we invite the audience to engage with the paper in the comment section below the video. For this session today, we are delighted to welcome as our discussant Ajung Moon, who is an assistant professor of electrical and computer engineering at McGill University. And she will present Humans in the Loop, Building a Culture of Responsible AI. This paper is by Jesslyn Diamond, Pamela Snively, Elena Novus, and Ivy Chu, all of TELUS. A link to this paper is available underneath the video. And with no further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Ajung. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Katie, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be a discussant for this very interesting paper on humans in the loop, building a culture of responsible AI, joined by the two authors. So before we start, I thought I would explain why I was so excited to read this paper and be a discussant to this paper. First of all, the title. We use the words humans in the loop a lot, in particular in the domain of robot ethics. We've learned to use it in a way that signals the need for humans to be part of making judgments, especially in terms of lethal autonomous weapons systems discussions. But in the AI ethics community, which is where this particular paper is situated, this is starting to take on a different meaning, referring to the need for more participatory approaches to the design and deployment of the technology itself. So this is what we see in this paper today. And then secondly, as Katie introduced before, the authors are all from TELUS. TELUS is a large telecommunications company here in Canada. And this is really interesting because we don't necessarily see a lot of the authors for this particular domain that come with very interesting, what I may call ethics owners job titles. So Jesslyn, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're coming from with the job title of responsible AI specialist. That's not a job title that you see all the time, right? And I think a data and society paper that was published last year on owning ethics actually refers to these kind of job titles as ethics owner. So I was really excited to hear more about that particular element from the industry in particular. But because it is coming from TELUS and the paper is about some of the projects that are happening within TELUS, that means we need to read the paper with that understanding as well. But we should also share in the excitement that academic work on this domain coming from industry is still quite rare, especially when we start to talk about operationalizing responsible AI in corporate settings. So let me set a little bit of a preamble here. Of the very few studies that's looked at operationalizing AI ethics, we have a little bit of a bleak view. A recent IBM report, for example, mentioned how AI ethics is really important and considered important by the corporate employees as well as the broader corporate members, corporate board members, for example. But at the same time, the C-levels, the CEOs in particular, don't necessarily see that as their priority nor their responsibility. So there is a disconnect. Some other studies have shown how knowing or learning about ethics principles or a code of ethics doesn't really lead to any ethical practices or better ethical thinking in practice. And there's also been some studies looking at evaluation of AI ethics frameworks and revealing that there are a lot of different loopholes. So with that backdrop is where this particular paper comes in, which is, okay, how do you build the notion of responsible AI as a culture within the corporation, in the midst of the fact that we don't have all the answers figured out in terms of how to do AI ethics or operationalize it in industry setting. So with that preamble, let me describe the paper a little bit more in detail. So the paper starts almost like a literature review, covering the rise of AI ethics discussions in the last few years. And the authors refer to Wei Zhu, the chairman of Accenture Greater China, and his definition of responsible AI. But the authors actually define it a little bit more narrowly as a corporate governance model. The authors in the paper define it as a human-centric approach that considers the impact of the use of AI, where responsible AI is essentially incorporation of fairness, transparency, and explainability as part of the framework for using AI within an organization, end quote. So this paper itself, contextualizing responsible AI, highlights that a broader participatory approach to include different multi-stakeholder perspectives is a viable and important self-governance model for corporate governance. Then the paper presents a little bit of a perspective from the Canadian contextualization of where this paper comes from again. So the authors present the privacy regulation in Canada and its 10 fair information principles as part of AI governance in Canada. So that is actually translation, in my view, of existing regulation, but framing it within the AI governance domain. And then there is a shared sentiment that AI ethics principles, or ethics principles more broadly speaking, are often vague, unactionable, and it doesn't really influence how things are actually designed, deployed, or evolved in the market. Then we see more of the shared sentiment, more of a common understanding nowadays, I would say, looking at the temptation to use existing data, where the pre-processing of the data is a highly expensive process, and so on and so forth. So it does a good job of capturing some of the practical and theoretical challenges to looking at AI governance and where it's contextualized today in the industry. Now, skipping ahead, section 4 is where the authors discuss the notion of building a culture of responsible AI in an organization. So the multi-stakeholder engagement approach is quite highlighted there, and I really appreciated that because I do believe, as the authors mentioned, it is a necessary component of trust. They highlight 3 areas of multi-stakeholder engagement. The first one is establishing accountability for the use of AI. Second being collaborative process to consider ethical use. And then lastly, transparency in how AI is being used. Now, this becomes really interesting because it is presented more as a process map, so to speak, in incorporating culture of responsible AI. But some of them I do think is raises a number of questions, or something that we can actually discuss with concrete use cases, for example. In the description of each of the 3 areas, the authors present the model, the corporate governance model, kind of built on existing privacy regulations in Canada, as well as corporate governance structure. Accountability, for example, it describes more of a layered approach that includes, appointing an accountable stakeholder as someone who can influence the leadership over the culture of the organization, data management, having more of a stewardship or distributed model, and then the decision about the data being documented and archived for future reflections. Collaborative process, if I capture it correctly, it seems to be much more about a call to action to encourage more collaborative or participatory process, highlighting the benefits that we all face in the domain today. And that includes things like pre-mortem, the need for continuous monitoring practices, and so on and so forth. And then we go into transparency, where it is much more about explaining how AI works more broadly to the public. Then transparency about the corporate design and deployment decisions made on a particular topic on specific ethics issues. Because I would say, when we talk about transparency and explainability, and then linking it to a discussion about trust issues with the public on AI, there has been a number of people who have been advocating for more education and awareness, but we still miss that layer of transparency, where the transparency about what are some of the critical AI ethics issues being discussed before a particular algorithm is launched, or when it is actually being deployed. I think those are some of the details that are missing in this particular paper, and in many other papers talking about transparency, because transparency can have many different layers, and to whom are we being transparent is also a bigger question. Section 5 is where I was the most excited about, because it was actually marketed as more of a case study in the beginning of the paper. And now this is the part where the authors talk about the how TELUS is approaching the AI ethics, responsible AI model. The case itself refers to the existence of Chief Data and Trust Officer, which I believe is Pamela, one of the authors of this paper, and the existence of an executive steering committee. And we find out that TELUS is a customer-centric company. Great. and we also get a hint of frameworks here and there, such as a questionnaire being mentioned, and then there is like a internal algorithmic impact assessment, or algorithm impact assessment, not to be confused with the Canadian government's directive on algorithmic impact assessment. But we are kind of left as readers without much of a detail being provided. And this is not necessarily a critique on this particular paper, but because I think in general, the field, especially when you talk about AI ethics research from the industry side, I think we're all grappling with the reality that we don't have a firm idea of what value AI ethics adds in a business, how to make that story fit, what frameworks should be recommended, what actually works or doesn't work, and to what degree being transparent about a specific issue hurts the business or adds value to the business. I think there are many practical and other challenges that prevents the industry from being very transparent about the details of these things. So the only one of the case studies available, publicly available out there today, would be one of the works that I've worked on, which is an assessment of ethics for Technical Safety BC, a safety authority in the province of British Columbia, which happens to be where TELUS is headquartered. And in that particular work, Technical Safety BC was happy to provide their comprehensive AI ethics assessment results from this third-party company that I was part of, publicly available online. And that detailed things like, okay, which values are in tension with each other, because of what reason, and what should be done about it. And so I wanted to really take a look at this paper with the mindset of, okay, let's get to that case study. Let's see what TELUS is doing differently. What were some of the challenges of bringing the notion of responsible AI as a culture shift? What led them to create this culture shift in the first place? What was it before? How has it changed? And what are some of the existing struggles today? And I think those are the details that is missing from the paper itself. And hopefully, I would invite the authors to take some time to reflect on those questions, and also, take the opportunity to discuss more of the details about what is it that you're actually doing. Yeah. So over to you, Jocelyn and Ivy.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Ajahn. That was wonderful to hear your views on what we had put together. And it sounds like perhaps we need a sequel.
Yes.
There is definitely more to the story. And I appreciate that you'd kind of described some of the work as a literature review. I think what formed the basis of what we put together and decided to put into this paper was sort of the result of the research we had been doing to stay connected with the best practices and see what is emerging in the field of AI ethics. And, our view is really that this human in the loop concept, or I've seen more recently like people in the loop, society in the loop, that human intervention is a big part of the story. And we are very much trying to work towards that participatory approach. So I understand you'd like to hear a little bit more about the kinds of things we're working on within the program operationally. And I also really appreciate that you've called out this need as an industry to sort of firm out what is the value of what we're doing, as well. The best practices and standards are very much evolving. So I think a lot of what we documented and put together is kind of where we put a stake and what we've kind of consolidated as a norm in this space. And when we try to describe the program in detail, I mean, it was quite a few months ago that this paper was drafted and submitted.
It was pre-COVID.
Yeah, pre-COVID, back in the olden days. And the program is quite new, so it would be hard to say, these are the standard questions we ask. These are the decisions that we've made or are adopting, because I think like so much of where the private sector is right now, it's agile, it's iterative. We are going out in beta. So I can kind of share that we have a responsible AI framework that we use as an internal document, and it builds upon those principles that I sort of structured the paper around of accountability, ethical use of data, as well as transparency, which is a TELUS is very much committed in practice to sharing a lot about our data and trust program on our privacy center online. And the interesting thing that we did, I think, to kind of build upon this, you mentioned the customer-centric culture. Our approach and what contributes to making our culture of responsible AI work so well, I think, is that fundamentally our business has this strategy of customer first. So even just incorporating that question of how does this model, this initiative, this AI project put our customers first, like that is absolutely a question that we are asking, and drilling into those benefits. What does success look like? How are we helping benefit our customers and putting them first through this initiative is very much part of our tool set. And then when we wanted to share our public commitment to responsible AI, we did some research with Canadians around the sentiment and understanding of where they're thinking that AI is. And one of the things we learned is that Canadians are very interested in the opportunity of AI, but want to understand more about how it works. So our site on responsible AI describes some of the use cases that we've undertaken and the ways we use AI, and tries to explain a little bit about what is artificial intelligence, machine learning, and what do we mean by responsible AI. So that's kind of a cornerstone which fits into the framework that we use internally. And our internal framework is in beta. We have it available for comment across all TELUS employees, because we wanted to work collaboratively on putting that together, not just having it be a document that comes out of the compliance office or data and trust. And I think we learned a little bit. The Government of Canada did a similar approach with their algorithm impact assessment, where they had public consultations and made the documents available on Google Docs. So we have this beta version internally, and there's a number of dimensions that we are considering there. It's about accountability for the use. So is this the right use case for AI? Do we have the tools and data robustly set up for that use? We have a foundation of privacy by design, security by design. Have these platforms and data been governed in a way that we think they're appropriate for using in AI? And data is the fuel, and it's a real challenge trying to have the data appropriately prepared for the use. And Ivy can speak a little bit more about that. The outcome that we're working towards, that's always kind of part of our framework. So what is the benefit, having that in mind from the outside, as well as fairness and the human, the customer impact. And that could include other stakeholders beyond just our customers. And having a plan for transparency, being able to explain how it works. Is it a model that is a black box? How do we handle those, and what sort of use cases are they appropriate for? And what's unique about AI very much is this concept of ongoing monitoring. So ensuring that we have a plan upfront to make sure the model is working as intended throughout its life cycle. And so that framework is supported by an internal set of questions, which is sort of ever evolving and helps us triage which models require more support and which ones should go to the governance council, which ones would we consider getting stakeholder input on, what use cases do we want to have more information about from our customers. And then we are also using model cards. So we are trying to pilot those within specific projects and teams that have an AI function, and creating the right documentation to support that explainability, governance very much, and help the teams learn from each other. TELUS being a very big organization, we have a lot of silos of analytics. So bringing that consistent view and helping everyone learn from each other is a big part of where the responsible AI program can support. And then we have, some training that we're doing with those teams as well. So Ivy, do you want to speak a little bit more about the stakeholders? And
about the idea of building the culture around, AI ethics being embedded in TELUS. So at TELUS, like Jesslyn mentioned, we have a culture of customer first. We also, one of the other things that TELUS believes in is spirited teamwork. So in terms of, realizing that we want to do what's best for our customers, and also like the idea that we're a team and that we want to go forward with spirited teamwork, we do a lot of collaboration, both within at the data level. So, when I talk with data people, I will say, if you're thinking about that algorithm, have you considered this? And also on the other hand, I've worked very closely with the data trust office and with Jesslyn in terms of, are we approaching, any of our algorithms or our data sets, or putting together our data sets sort of like in an ethical way. Right. And then, like Jesslyn says, like sometimes, because this is such a new field, and sometimes, we just don't, we just can't answer some of the questions. I think what this sets us up for is that, yes, we can revisit this when when we have questions about, is this what we actually intended? So I think that is, how this whole culture around, the responsible use of AI is being grown and nurtured within TELUS. So I just wanted to add that one first, because that's always a question. Like, how do you build a culture of data? How do you build a culture of responsible use of data and AI? So that's the first one. And then stakeholders. So I mentioned some of the stakeholders already. So of course there are all the data, I'll say data professionals, the analysts, the engineers, the scientists, anyone who uses data, like,
and compliance.
Yes, right. Like anyone. So of course we have all our internal stakeholders, right? And I think most anyone who works with data, they're aware of how important it is to be able to use the data in a responsible method or approach. And then the other in terms of the other stakeholders, I also just want to talk about how, even though, TELUS is one organization, we're not just working by ourselves. We are actually making sure that we collaborate with other stakeholders within the general field of AI and data around the world, right? So we do a lot of work with third parties such as research institutes. So TELUS is actually a gold sponsor of the Vector Institute, which is located in Toronto and headed by Jeffrey Hinton. So we do a lot of work there that's not necessarily telecommunications related. So we will attend all their seminars. Well, maybe not all the seminars, but we'll attend a lot of their seminars. We've been invited to speak at their seminars, and we're actually currently undertaking a project with them that has to do with reducing power consumption. So, that's not typically, just a telco issue, but it's along the idea of AI for social benefit, in that, we're trying to reduce, our impact on the earth in general and climate change. We're also involved with the GSMA in terms of their privacy working groups. We've also worked with the GSMA in conjunction with the Turing Institute in the UK, where we participated in, I'll call it a hackathon, but that's not really the
much more collaborative than that, actually.
I'm using the term hackathon because I think most people are more familiar with that. It wasn't competitive, it was collaborative. But in this event, we took one of our questions that we have about, how can we use our data to better serve our customers? And we took it to a group of 12 PhDs and postdocs at the Turing Institute. And, they were of varying different backgrounds, from everything from, traditional computer science to astrophysics. And, we collaborated with other telcos there, because it was sponsored by the GSMA, which is the umbrella institution for telecommunications around the globe. We collaborated with other telecommunication companies and with other PhDs and postdocs and other academics, just so that we can understand what are some of the best practices in terms of AI. How are other people in industry and academia approaching this, approaching these problems using different AI techniques? And one of the very interesting things that came up with is there was a contingent of astrophysicists, and they said, well, some of these questions that you've come up with can be modeled as a black hole or an anomaly. So let's apply those techniques. So it was, in our,
a real commitment to multidisciplinarity approaches to this. It's not just Ivy and the data science team, but we have the view,
and not just in telecommunications, but we are trying to understand what are some of the best approaches in academia, and industry, and not just in Canada, but around the world, with different perspectives.
Yeah, I would say, I'm going to play a little bit of a devil's advocate here, because, all the projects that you've mentioned, all the things that you were mentioning, that generates more discussion and presence of TELUS in this particular domain. But that's the very thing that leads people to think about the word ethics washing, right? All these industry folks are out there being engaged in this particular domain, but actually, when it comes to what is actually being done within their companies, there's a lot of black boxiness happening. And one of the critique for ethics initiatives being ethics washing is deemed to be about the lack of the third-party audits or outsiders being able to transparently take a look at what it is that is being done, and whether the public or the third parties are able to influence the decisions to deploy a particular system, or so on and so forth. So does the accountability or responsible AI accountability person in the corporation or a committee actually have an authority to say no to a project? What is a real level of influence there? And how do you even navigate the need for the tension around transparency, right? Because you guys are in the company already. There must be communications teams, both in the internal and external, and they probably review everything. The internal email chains that goes out from the executive board saying, we have a great responsible AI program, and we're going to word things in this particular manner. And then when it becomes an external communication, there's another PR team that works on that stuff, right? So going through that process is perhaps necessary for business because it builds branding and so on and so forth, but that also builds a layer of filter between what information is available to the public or to external parties, and what information is filtered even throughout the internal chains of communication as well. So how have you dealt with that particular challenge in trying to build in this culture of responsible and AI, transparency, accountability, collaborative approach, when, you know, as you mentioned, GSMA, great big global community, but it's a community of competitors in the same domain as well. So, you know, obviously the kind of information you share there is also limited. So how do you deal with that in this particular setting? Yeah. So what does meaningful participatory approach of broad set of stakeholders mean when transparency in itself poses real practical challenges?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in any large organization, there's going to be layers of communications and reviews, and I think those can serve as an opportunity to really be thoughtful about the project at hand and challenge our business and our organization to be ready to account for and explain the purposes for which they're conducting some sort of initiative. You know, I do think that part of what Ivy's describing is our ability to go and get those fresh perspectives. So, you know, a lot of what we took away from the Global AI Challenge was validation, like different approaches and thinking about how we could serve our customers best in ways that we hadn't thought of with the same teams. And, you know, I think that we have a very established culture of data governance in our organization, and that comes from real sponsorship and a sort of embedded cultural values towards being respectful and you know, the trust model we describe in the paper of not wanting to shy away from using data when it can generate value, and doing that in a way that is respectful as well as secure. So these are established notions, and maybe why we speak about privacy a little bit, because it is something that TELUS has really been committed to, and having responsible AI hinge out of that mindset really helps our team members connect the importance of this with what they're doing. And you know, I think fundamentally our team is very focused on adding value and making what we're doing meaningful to our customers and you know, the world in some cases, as Ivy mentioned. So you'll see ideas like social capitalism making headway. You know, an organization is made up of an audience of humans who are also interested in making a difference in people's lives and helping add benefits to society. So we really take that seriously, and I think we do have the channels to say, you know, this isn't right or this isn't working, and then those decisions are taken very seriously as part of our established structure of governance, corporate governance. But it is definitely a challenge, and that I think that relying on collaboration and building communication channels between, you know, the teams that generate the data and the teams that use the data are critical for having a culture of responsible AI. And that's really the point where we're trying to make. You know, we've initially looked at like publishing a list of standard, like our commitments or our principles in which we would harness AI, but you know, it's really about more than that for us. And I think it has to be. We don't want to just say, you know, we're going to be accountable and fair. We try to explain what that means and connect it to our business, to the way that we impact our customers' lives, and make that real for our teams so that they do take it seriously. And that's, going back to the culture versus having a policy or a commitment that stands alone. So this is totally embedded into the way that we are, our AI life cycle.
Anything for you, Ivy?
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned, it's, Jessalyn talked about customer first, and then I talked about, the idea of team. So I think those, the external facing, which is the customer first, and then the idea of spirited teamwork really solidifies to us that, yes, the idea of responsible AI, we could just talk about it, but it actually prompts us to take action on it, right? And then also, looking beyond just, our team members and our customers, but like the broader community helps us to kind of like, place where we are and sort of get best practices so that we can sort of navigate our way through this new technology.
Yeah.
So can you discuss a little bit more, just because I'm also kind of getting at my curiosities here. One ethics challenge or an issue that you've identified of an AI project that TELUS is launching, or that you've done a multi-stakeholder engagement and identified a new problem that you're allowed to speak publicly.
Well, our website describes the Trusted Signals Exchange project that we had with a startup in Toronto called Integrate AI. And, this was one where we were looking at using de-identified and aggregated insights and having signals generated out of that data to help benefit multiple partners in the Trusted Signals Exchange. And so that was an initiative that we spent a great deal of time thinking through, both with our office, our data governance council, and we had some sentiment surveys done and focus groups, and then working with a third party, a startup, on their positioning around data and trust, and their commitment to responsible use of AI was a real driving factor in that initiative. There's some so we tried to be really transparent about that, how that works, and have included certain preferences for our customers to participate in it or not in the website, in our website. So that was a very challenging initiative, and it took a lot of sessions with the architects and the machine learning engineers trying to understand exactly what was happening technically, so we could get the level of comfort that we needed to support that initiative and move it forward. So I think there's tremendous opportunity for approaches in how to help everyone understand what AI is doing and how it's handling and processing data, sometimes in ways that we can't even imagine. So in that case, we were talking a little bit about like fruit as an example of how the data was combined, and juice and all of this. And we had to go through it again and again to really understand the technology. And the driving, mission there was to really get to a place where we were sure it was working the way that it was intended to work. And what gets me most excited about the opportunities of using AI responsibly is that in some cases it can really provide additional protection for individuals. And there's situations where you don't need to use personal information and synthetic data. Like there's a lot of opportunity around the use of data in through machine learning and AI to minimize the impacts for people, or the negative outcomes.
So I guess I'll ask the last question. I feel like I'm interviewing you guys now.
I feel a little bit like
I used
that.
to do podcasts back in the day, so.
Wow.
Yeah, I guess the question here for you is, you're in the field and you're in charge of the responsible AI project within this TALUS.
Yeah.
Now, what would you say were the biggest challenges in shifting the culture or the mindset, be it from the leadership side or your management side, or even doing, you probably go through a performance review as employees in TELUS, demonstrating that yes, we have made a difference in making our algorithm X% more transparent or X% more fair, or so on and so forth. Is there more of a practical challenge that's less discussed in the domain today?
Good question. So are you asking about like metrics and measurement of responsible AI?
Well, I mean,
I think that could be a whole another sequel paper.
Because I mean, your roles are very interesting, right? And just because you have been hired in this position doesn't mean TELUS all of a sudden has responsible AI culture. Culture shifts happen slowly. And yeah, my assumed my assumption is that many different actors in TELUS probably has a different understanding of what responsible AI is really about. It may or may not map with what you actually do.
So there is a lot of education, to be honest, and I think the real challenge is in the terminology. Were we doing irresponsible AI before? And what is it that we can create that's new? What was already good and needed to just be reframed? I think that's not trying to recreate whole programs and initiatives and trying to leverage what's already good and build upon that has been kind of our approach for making a difference and connecting it, as you said before, to the existing culture and tying the aims and efforts of responsible AI to the core values of the organization. I think that's, keeping it simple. There's a lot to be said for having an effective outcome when you're tying it right to those things that matter to the business, to our team across the board. And so, I think that as far as measuring the success, we are providing like reporting on the initiatives that we review through this process and getting feedback and input from team members on their thoughts about our approach. And that's been a really exciting to see and building new relationships and connections across the business. And we, there was at one point in time, there was contemplation of like an AI center of excellence, but we found that it is already sort of embedded into our existing forums and groups. And, I think what the UK government did is kind of similar. Like they stood up a AI ministry or something, but it's supposed to be short term until AI becomes a part of everything that is already in existence, where AI is truly a tool to enable outcomes across existing platforms. And that's very much where we see it as something that augments what we're already doing. And it's that human intervention in the technology and not just letting it automate on its own and self-train. And those are where we really don't think that we can get a lot of value from AI. We need to have our humans in the loop, and our team members are a huge part of that.
All right. Thank you both. Any last words before we close?
I think it's just, it is a continuum of the culture that already existed, the customer first, spirited teamwork. I know I didn't really mention this, but also the idea of using user-centric design and then, keeping humans in the loop in terms of responsible AI.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for your time and for the paper.
Well, thank you for your feedback and experience reading it.
All right. Well, that was an absolutely fabulous discussion. Thank you so much to Ajung, Ivy, and Jesselyn for sharing with us their insight and their careful consideration of these important topics. This is the part where if we were here in person, we'd have people jumping up to the microphone to offer their commentary and their feedback and their bright ideas. So we encourage you to sound off in the comments, tell us what you think, and keep this important conversation about responsible AI going. Thank you very much for being with us here today.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.